Hello dear students, welcome to Bajirao IAS Academy Daily News Analysis. Today is 18th August 2024 and today we have a few important and relevant articles from different newspapers, and one by one we'll try to discuss all those important news articles in a very detailed manner. And before discussing them, yesterday we have one prelims practice question. So the question was, the Supreme Commander of the Indian Armed Forces is which of the following? The Defense Minister of India, Home Minister of India, President of India, and Prime Minister of India. So the correct answer for this question is option C, because President of India is known as the Supreme Commander of Indian Armed Forces, right? So but the executive authority and even the responsibility of the entire national security is vested with the Prime Minister. And when we talk about the President is head of the government, right? So head of the state, President is head of the state. And when we talk about the Prime Minister is head of the government. So in fact, President is also known as the head of the constitution, And when we talk about the executive authority or the responsibility of the national security, it lies with the Prime Minister of India and the cabinet ministers chosen by the Prime Minister and appointed by the President, right? So of course, the President of India is the Supreme Commander of Indian Armed Forces. And today's prelims practice question is, which of the following country has launched a artificial sun project that actually mimics the energy generation process of the sun? And the options are A, United States, B, China, C, Japan, and D, Russia. And this is very often in news in recent times, and it is a very important question, and try to answer this question in the comment section. And we'll start this discussion with a very important article that is given in the Hindu. In recent times, Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand have been experiencing a series of flash floods and landslides also, right? So cloud burst or heavy rainfall or increasing anthropogenic activities in the mountainous areas or the hilly areas of Himalayas in both these states are one of the major reasons for these flash floods or landslide like incidents, right? So these flash floods in Himachal Pradesh have created certain water supply problems in the entire state, and we will talk about what are these flash floods and what are the causes of these flash floods, and how Himachal Pradesh has actually been facing a lot of problems because of the environmental degradation that has been taking place, increasing anthropogenic activities, destroying the fragile nature of the Himalayan ecosystem. Now the context is that flash floods in Himachal Pradesh have actually killed hundreds of people in Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand and several states where these Himalayas are located, right? So in fact, these flash floods have also damaged critical infrastructure. When we talk about any natural disaster, whether it is a natural disaster or man-made disaster, so these disasters would actually damage the infrastructure and even leads to the loss of life and property, right? So whenever we talk about disasters, increasing frequency and intensity of disasters, climate change is the key driving factor of these natural disasters, right? So climate change is driven by the anthropogenic factors. The anthropogenic factors are actually responsible for the increasing incident and frequency of these natural disasters, right? So because anthropogenic factors have been causing climate change, because anthropogenic factors, essentially we use fossil fuels as a source of energy, and these fossil fuels generate the greenhouse gases, and greenhouse gases in turn creating climate change, and climate change has been increasing frequency and intensity of these disasters, including the recent Wayanad floods or Wayanad landslides also. We have seen hundreds of people have lost their lives in Wayanad landslides. So these are all because of the climate change, right? Now when we talk about any such natural disasters, the vulnerability of countries like India, which is known as India is known as a developing country, developing country, or it is also a country in the global south. So in these developing countries, there is actually a high vulnerability to these disasters. High vulnerability is because poor infrastructure in these respective countries, and apart from that, high population density and poor standards and regulation when it comes to construction, and all these factors have been increasing the intensity of such disasters and causing large scale damage to infrastructure, and even leading to the large scale loss of life that we have recently seen in Wayanad landslides. However, these flash floods in Himachal Pradesh are also the cause of the concern because they damaged infrastructure, and these flash floods have led to the killing of hundreds of people, and therefore they actually raised concerns with respect to the protection and conservation of ecologically fragile Himalayan region. In recent times, Himalayas or Himalayan ecosystem destruction has been taking place at a much faster pace because of increasing anthropogenic activities within this Himalayan ecosystem, because there has been increasing encroachment of the fragile Himalayan ecosystem, and commercial activities have been increasing, and apart from commercial activities, so infrastructure is being built so without proper study, and there is no environmental impact assessment also. So all these factors have been raising concerns about the fragile nature of the Himalayan ecosystem, right? So apart from this, these flash floods also adversely impacting the traditional water sources across the state of Himachal Pradesh. So this is the brief context of the news article that is given in the Hindu. Now we will try to understand the flash floods. What are these flash floods, right? Because in general studies paper 1 and general studies paper 2, you may get a question, paper 3 you may get a question on flash floods, because there are frequent occurrences of flash floods have been taking place across different states, right? So flash floods are sudden surges in the water levels of a rivers, right? So generally when there is an intense spell of rain for a longer periods of time, what happens? So that would suddenly increases the level of water, so that could further causes a large scale flash floods, and these large scale flash floods often leads to rivers changing their course and even water entering into the areas where people are actually living. Now it is problematic because people are nowadays have been occupying the floodplains of rivers, so that we have seen with respect to the encroachment of Yamuna floodplains are being encroached by people in Delhi. So therefore whenever people are encroaching upon the floodplains of rivers, so it would causes a large scale damage to infrastructure, and even it leads to the large scale loss of lives due to such flash floods. However, when we talk about the nature of flash floods, they are highly localized events, and they are a very short duration of time, right? So they are localized events, and apart from that they are also having a very short duration. So a short duration usually means usually less than 6 hours between the occurrence of the rainfall and the peak flood as part of the flash floods, right? So in fact the flood situation would further worsen in the presence of a choked drainage lines. Now as of now in urban areas, what has been happening is most of the drainage is choked because of the increased usage of plastic and poor waste collection by the urban municipal bodies. And apart from that, if you look at the rivers, so rivers are increasingly polluted, rivers are encroached by the people, and commercial constructions are being built on the floodplains of these rivers. Now when the river course is being reduced, so it increases the intensity and frequency of such flash floods and causing widespread damage and loss of lives also. So therefore this is a very briefly flash floods, and we will try to understand what are the causes of these flash floods. Now, heavy rain causes flash floods. There is no doubt about that. For example, whenever there is intense spell of rain for a very short duration of time in one particular area, so that would causes flash floods, right? So apart from heavy rain, flash floods can also be caused by dam break or levee failures or ice or debris jams or sudden release of the water from the natural reservoirs such as glacial lakes. So all these things actually causes these flash floods. However, when it comes to India, these flash floods are very often associated with the cloudbursts. Now, what are these cloudbursts? Cloudburst is a weather phenomenon where one region experiences intense spells of rainfall for a very short duration, and that is known as a cloudburst. So, in these cloudbursts, a very short, a narrow region or a very limited region would experiences a very heavy and intense rainfall, and that is cloudburst. However, in India, very often these flash floods are associated with the cloudbursts that have been taking place in Himalayan ecosystem in recent times, right? So this is a sudden and intense rainfall in a very short period of time is known as flash floods. So what should be the way forward in this context to reduce the vulnerability of people to these flash floods and also adopt and mitigate such flash floods? So Indian Meteorological Department has been using the Doppler radars technology, right? So you just remember this Doppler radar technology, and Indian Meteorological Department has been using this technology. It is in fact a flash flood forecasting and early warning system, right? So that could actually predict the occurrence of flash floods over a particular area. So that has been adopted by the Indian Meteorological Department. And in fact, we also have National Disaster Management Authority. So it was created by the National Disaster Management Act of 2005, and this National Disaster Management Authority has also advises the inhabitation of low-lying areas. So people should not live in low-lying areas, and people should not encroach upon the floodplains of the major rivers, and even proper management of nallas and drains is also very, very important. So therefore, the major responsibility for the maintenance of nallas and drainages is given to the urban local bodies, right? So these drainages should be regularly cleaned, and there should not be any choking of these drainages. And in fact, the National Disaster Management Authority has been regularly coordinating with the state disaster management authorities and even district disaster management authorities to work in a holistic manner to undertake the preventive measures, especially with respect to the flash floods and landslides and flood-like incidents, right? So whenever such incidents took place, the National Disaster Response Force would be immediately deployed for the relief and rescue operations in that particular area which is impacted by the flash floods or cloudburst and even landslides also, right? So what is this news? We'll try to understand this news. We have already understood. So what are these flash floods? And in fact, there are 51 flash floods in the state of Himachal Pradesh in this monsoon itself, right? So when this monsoon started in India, Himachal Pradesh alone experienced 51 incidents of flash floods. So this is what we can say, that there has been increasing intensity and frequency of these flash floods, right? So there are number of factors because of the flash floods increasing intensity and frequency. We have already discussed that. And in fact, so flash floods, if I can define this again, so it is a highly localized and a sudden phenomenon that no one can expect that it could actually takes place, right? So it is localized, a specific area and sudden phenomenon, and in fact it is normally a result of a runoff from the torrential downpour, right? So whenever there's a cloud burst or heavy downpour in one particular region, that would further trigger these flash floods. And in fact, so among the other reasons, the heavy downpour or cloud burst is the key reason behind the water springs and other natural resources going to defunct. Okay, so after that, how it has been impacting the water supply of the state of Himachal Pradesh, because in Himachal Pradesh the traditional sources of water includes springs and ponds. So these are springs and ponds because, you know, if you look at Himachal Pradesh is located in the Himalayas, right? So it is located in the greater Himalayas. So therefore the traditional sources of water for the state of Himachal Pradesh is spring and ponds, and they actually play a very important role in supplementing the water requirements of rural and even urban masses also in the state of Himachal Pradesh. However, so when we talk about these water resources or water sources in Himachal Pradesh, there were around 10,512 traditional sources of water in the state in the rural habitations. However, so due to increasing climate change, or increasing intensity of climate change, it has been resulting in extreme rainfall. There has been extreme rainfall in the state of Himachal Pradesh, and whenever there is an extreme rainfall, whenever there is a cloud burst that has been taking place in the state of Himachal Pradesh, so water starts rapidly flows downstream, and that eventually the soil does not get the perennial water intake, and which is necessary groundwater recharge. So groundwater recharge generally don't take place in the state of Himachal Pradesh because of number of reasons, and that has been further impacting the water availability in the state of Himachal Pradesh, and it could create a water scarcity or water crisis in the state of Himachal Pradesh in the future, right? So you can also see the vulnerability of flash floods on different aspects. The next important article that we are going to discuss is Mpox. So a recent emergence of Mpox. So why this Mpox is a global health emergency? So that we need to understand in this context, right? So in fact, World Health Organization, so this World Health Organization actually manages the any healthcare emergency that took place in any part of the world. So on August 14th, the World Health Organization has actually declared that Mpox outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, so that took place in Democratic Republic of Congo. So it is an African country, and in fact most of these African countries are very well known for the spread of zoonotic diseases, right? So World Health Organization has actually declared Mpox outbreak in this Democratic Republic of Congo and other African countries as a global health emergency, right? So this emergence of Mpox in these countries is a global health emergency. And in fact, so World Health Organization director, so his name was Adnan Ghebreyesus. So he made a declaration on the advice of the International Health Regulations Emergency Committee that this Mpox is going to be the global health emergency. And apart from that, the World Health Organization had regarded the Mpox outbreak as an acute grade 3 emergency. Now acute grade 3 emergency is the highest emergency that World Health Organization ever declares, and in fact this highest declaration or grade 3 emergency by the World Health Organization seeks a greater coordination and greater cooperation from all the countries to immediately prevent this turning into a pandemic like a COVID-19. The outbreak, which first started in the year 2022, has further continued without any resistance. So it started continuing without any resistance, and in recent times there has been an increased instances of people who are being infected with the Mpox disease, right? So we will briefly understand what exactly is this Mpox disease. So Mpox, which can also be called as monkeypox, is a rare zoonotic disease, right? So it is a rare and zoonotic disease. Now zoonotic diseases are diseases which generally spread from animals to human beings. So if I can tell you the examples of zoonotic diseases, COVID-19 is a zoonotic disease, rabies is a zoonotic disease. So most of these diseases are zoonotic diseases, and these diseases spread from animals to human beings. And in fact, so this zoonotic disease is caused by a virus named monkeypox virus. So monkeypox virus actually caused this mpox disease among the human beings, and in fact it belongs to the genus of arthropox virus in the poxviridae family, right? So this is the family that they belong to, poxviridae family of the orthopoxvirus genus. Now there are other diseases also which are being caused by viruses from the family. So they include the smallpox, cowpox, and many other diseases, so which can also be caused by the virus which belong to the same poxviridae family. And when we talk about the way of transmission of this particular mpox virus, so it is being transmitted to human beings through physical contact with the other infectious individual. For example, imagine that the person A is infected with the mpox disease, and someone named person B who comes in contact with the person A who would also be infected with the mpox, and even it can happen through direct contact with the infected blood, fluid, or skin of the person who is already infected with the mpox disease. And so we should not forget that apart from direct contact with the infected individual's body fluids, so mpox can also spread through the contact with the contaminated materials and even the infected animal bites. So for example, imagine that an animal called squirrel is infected with this mpox virus, and that squirrel has come in close contact with you, or it scratches you, it bites you, then also you would get this mpox disease. And when we talk about this disease and it spreads and the intensity of this disease across the world, currently there are two clades or two different genetic groups of mpox virus exist across the world. And first genetic group of this mpox disease is called as clade 1. And this clade 1 is mostly found in Central and Eastern African countries, right? So they are found across Central and East African countries. And clade 2, which is actually linked to more cases in West Africa, right? So there are a more number of cases from the genetic group clade 2 in the West Africa and Central and East Africa, a genetic group called clade 1. So these are two different genetic groups of the same mpox virus, right? So the exact source of mpox virus, so as of now we don't know what is the exact source of mpox, and we actually have no idea about this, but small mammals like squirrel and monkeys are believed to be the carriers of this mpox virus. So we should also try to understand the symptoms of this virus. So whenever any person is infected with the mpox virus, so he would experience a range of symptoms, right? So first, whenever a person is infected, so it would be exhibited, the symptoms of the mpox would be generally, so mostly develop some rashes on the body parts of human beings, and then that could develop into blisters, and these blisters are filled with the liquid which may be itchy or even painful also, right? So you can see on this image, so these are blisters, and these blisters are filled with the liquid, and sometimes these blisters would be painful and even itchy also. So that is how the people would experience these symptoms. So symptoms of mpox can usually begin within a week of after infection, and even they can also start 1 to 21 days after exposure to any such virus as well. However, there is a different segment of people who are at a higher risk of infecting this mpox disease. So they include children, pregnant women, and those people who have the immunocompromised people, or they have a lower immunogenicity. So they would be having the higher risk of infecting the mpox virus, right? So apart from that, now what is the treatment as of now for the mpox disease, mpox virus? So one thing you need to understand is that there is no specific treatment for mpox as of now, right? So no vaccine, no specific medicine is available for the mpox virus as of now. However, the World Health Organization, a global body, a top level body which looks after all these pandemics, has actually recommended a supportive care treatment of symptoms of people who are infected with the mpox. So supportive care essentially includes medication for pain, medication for pain, or fever for people so who need to, but symptoms usually, and they even go away on their own as well, right? So there are different vaccines. For example, MVABN is one vaccine, and LC16 is another vaccine, and even Orthopox vac. So these are different vaccines which are being developed against the smallpox, and also which are being approved by the prevention of mpox. And however, only people who are at risk are considered for vaccination, right? So as of now there are different vaccines, but these vaccines, one thing that you need to understand, these vaccines are being developed for the mpox. They're not being developed for the mpox, rather they were developed earlier for a smallpox. Remember that smallpox also caused by a virus which belonged to the this very same belonged to the family of the virus which also causes mpox. So therefore there is no specific vaccine or specific medicine for mpox, but for smallpox, so the vaccine exists, such as MVABN, LC16, and even Orthopox vac also, right? So these are three different vaccines that are being available as of now, and they are being developed against smallpox. However, if any infected individual have been at a risk of higher because of symptoms, or even facing the highest risk of event death, so in that cases World Health Organization has recommended to use these vaccines which are already developed for the smallpox. So however, only people who are at risk are considered for the vaccination, right? So in fact, World Health Organization does not recommend mass vaccination against mpox. For example, number of people who are being infected with the mpox, and we could not administer smallpox vaccines to all individuals which are infected with the mpox disease. And that is why, since we do not have any specific vaccine and medicine, and we should only give supportive care, so it is a cause of concern, especially in a countries like India, where we have a huge population density and weak healthcare system, and therefore it could create some problems, because it is contagious in nature. It spreads from one infected individual to another infected individual, and because of this reason it is a cause of concern. We all knew that how COVID-19 pandemic has actually created a large scale havoc across the country. However, the cause of concern with respect to mpox disease is that, so recently in Pakistan, 3 people have been identified that they were already infected with the mpox disease. So it actually means that mpox has came very close to India's neighbors. So therefore it is obviously a cause of concern for us. However, on Thursday, Sweden, a Nordic country or Scandinavian country, which has also announced the first mpox case, right? So it has already announced the first mpox case outside Africa of the clade 1 variant of the mpox. Okay, so remember that these viruses are actually having 2 different genetic groups. So one group is clade 1 and another genetic group is clade 2, and the Sweden has also identified the first mpox case, and this mpox case is outside Africa and it belonged to the clade 1 variant of the mpox. And in fact, as per the World Health Organization, so far around 116 countries and have actually impacted with this mpox virus, and in fact it is also the worst in the Democratic Republic of Congo and its neighboring countries. So these African countries are the worst hit due to the mpox disease, right? So next article is ongoing protest about the recent rape incident that took place in R.G. Kar Medical College in Kolkata, and that has led to the rape and killing of a 31-year-old doctor in Kolkata itself. And after that, large scale protests by the doctors and medical professionals started across the country, and they are protesting and even demanding the safety and security of the healthcare staff in these hospitals. doctors. So we will try to understand what has been the situation and what the protesting doctors have been demanding, right? So do doctors need a Central Protection Act is the article that was given in the Hindu newspaper. So resident doctors across India are actually on a strike, and they are demanding better laws or reforming the existing laws. And these laws, the reformed laws, would ensure safety and security for these doctors while they are on duty. And in fact, the large-scale protests of these resident doctors was started when the rape and murder of a young doctor in the R.G. Kar Medical College took place in Kolkata on August 9. So August 9, a heinous crime took place in R.G. Kar Medical College, a medical college and hospital, and in this college a young doctor was raped and then murdered. And after that, these resident doctors have started protesting across the country. And in fact, so doctors who are on protest have pointed out that the hospital administration and state government, they attempted to underreport the incident, so misreport, underreport the incident, so to essentially prevent a large scale protest by the people or public outrage. So what the government and the hospital tried to do, so they tried to underreport this incident that took place. And in fact, there is no central law that actually protects the healthcare workers. So we very often hear news that these healthcare workers are being mistreated, or they are being they even face violence by the patients and the relatives of the patients, and we have widely seen this during the COVID-19 pandemic times. So therefore the doctors have been demanding the safety and security for them, and there is a need for a new law which ensures safety and security of these young doctors, right? So what is the ground reality? We will understand the brief background, right? So how can we further strengthen the safety and security of these doctors from the violence of the patients and the relatives of the patients? So when we look into the provisions of the Indian Constitution, now Indian Constitution has given the responsibility of health and law and order maintenance to the state. Okay, so 7th schedule of the Indian Constitution talks about 3 different lists with a different jurisdiction for the state governments and the central government also. For example, when we talk about the 7th schedule, there are 3 different lists: union list, concurrent list, and state list. So union list is the list in which there are certain subjects. On those subjects only union parliament can pass laws. And state subject is also a list of subjects on which the state legislature can pass laws. And on the concurrent list matters, both state legislature and union parliament can actually pass laws. So however, so when we talk about the distribution of powers between the state and the center, the health and law and order are considered as state subjects, and in fact they are part of the state subjects. So therefore it is the responsibility of the state to manage the healthcare institutions and provide safety and security for the healthcare professionals and even the medical workers. So therefore it is the primary responsibility of the respective state government or even the union territory administration. So they have to take a note of events and even eventualities and do what is necessary to prevent violence. So essentially they have to prevent the violence, and the responsibility lies with the respective state governments. However, in India, violence against the healthcare workers or healthcare professionals is not a new thing. In fact, it is a very common and a very regular phenomenon. And one heinous crime that India was seen on a medical worker that took place in the year 1973. So in 1973, a nurse, a medical worker called Aruna Ramchandra Shanbag, so that you can see her on this image. So this Aruna Ramchandra Shanbag was working as a junior nurse at a hospital in Mumbai. So that was King Edward Memorial Hospital. So she was working as a junior nurse in the King Edward Memorial Hospital, Mumbai, and she was sexually assaulted and raped by a hospital sweeper in the year 1973. So from 1973 until she died in the year 2015, she was in a vegetative condition, right? So that was the brutal nature of this crime that was committed by the hospital sweeper on Aruna Ramachandra Shanbag. So she was died in the year 2015. From 1973 to 2015, she was in that vegetative condition, right? So she spent 41 years in a vegetative state following the attack that took place in 1973, and in fact there were a lot of appeals in front of the Supreme Court to grant passive euthanasia for Aruna Ramachandra Shanbag. Okay, so passive euthanasia for Aruna Ramachandra Shanbag, so that she would not go through all this pain, right? So in fact, years later, now the doctors and healthcare workers have been continuing to protest. They're continuing to demand a specific and basic safety measures across the hospital, so they could do their work without any fear. And in fact, it is the responsibility of the governments to improve the security for these doctors and healthcare professionals in the hospitals, right? So whatever happened on August 9 is a heinous crime. So if government already provided security to the doctors or a safe working conditions for the doctors, such crimes would actually not take place, right? So India should actually learn lessons from what happened in 1963 with respect to Aruna Shanbag case, right? So now the doctors have been demanding specific and basic safety measures at different hospitals, including improved lighting should be there, and increased security has to be provided in these hospitals, and even installation of properly monitored security cameras or CCTV cameras. So all these measures have to be taken across different hospitals in India, right? And in fact, the young doctors who are protesting, so they are also demanding that this should be a wake-up call. In fact, India should actually learn lessons from 1973 Aruna Shanbag incident, but India did not learn any lessons, and India did not provided any safety and security. The government did not provided any safety and security for the doctors and healthcare professionals who are working tirelessly every day, right? So now the protesting doctors have been demanding that this should be a wake-up call, and doctors who are particularly the junior doctors who are actually working night shifts, and even nurses, whether they irrespective of gender, whether they are female or male. So in fact, they are increasingly facing a lot of threats. So threats, not just the physical threats, and even mental threats, mental harassment, physical assaults, and sexual harassment of the women at workplaces, especially in these hospitals. And in fact, it has been a growing concern for the doctors, especially the female doctors who are working in these hospitals, right? So this safety and security is a matter of concern for the government and even the normal people also. So the government should actually come up with a series of measures to further strengthen security and safety of the doctors who are working in these hospitals, right? And one thing that we need to understand about the safety and security of healthcare professionals is that so violence against the healthcare professionals is not just confined to India alone. Rather, it is a global phenomenon. So entire the world, we could see the violence against the doctors and medical professionals has been increasing. But on the other hand, developed countries like United States of America, UK, Australia have come up with a set of measures to protect these doctors and healthcare professionals and healthcare workers from the violence, right? So for example, when we talk about that, United Kingdom's NHS actually enforces a zero tolerance policy against violence or violence on the doctors, right? So in fact, it is being supported by the dedicated security team, and apart from dedicated security team, it also has a comprehensive reporting system also. And even Australian hospitals also have introduced the safety measures such as security personnel, panic buttons, mandatory de-escalation training for the healthcare professionals. So India can actually learn from these examples which already set by these countries, whether it is UK, Australia or US. These are the measures which protect the workers, healthcare professionals, doctors from the violence by the patients and the relatives of the patients. And these measures would also provide more safety and security for the workers, for the healthcare workers in those hospitals. So India should learn from these examples which were set by these countries, and India should introduce the Central Protection Act immediately. Now, so specifically, what are these protesting doctors have been demanding, right? So we all knew about the Indian Medical Association. So this Indian Medical Association is a national level association of allopathic doctors, right? So allopathic is a different a form of medicine, like how we have Ayurveda, Unani. So Indian Medical Association is an association at the national level of these allopathic doctors, and that is being maintained at a policy level. And in fact, there was a huge reluctance of the government to actually acknowledge the violence that has been taking place against the doctors in these healthcare centers. Right? So the government's policy of not acknowledging the violence against the doctors has to be changed. The government should actually acknowledge that the violence against the doctors has been taking place, and there is a need to undertake certain measures to protect the doctors, ensure the safety, ensure the security, and that is very, very important, and this is their one of the demand. And in fact, the Indian Medical Association has also sought the hospital security protocols, right? So these hospital security protocols should actually be matched with the security protocols that are being followed at the airports, right? So very stringent security measures are actually followed in these airports, and Indian Medical Association has been demanding the very same stringent medical protocols even at the hospitals to ensure safety and security of the healthcare workers. And in fact, Indian Medical Association has also been demanding that these healthcare centers should be declared as safe zones with the mandatory security entitlements. And there are also suggestions that the central forces such as Central Industrial Security Forces must be deployed to provide security to all the hospitals, especially the district hospital and the central and state government hospitals, right? So these hospitals should be declared as a safe zones, and there should be a mandatory security entitlement for each hospitals, including that there should be a CCTV cameras and even deployment of the security personnel as well. And the working and the living conditions of the resident doctors need a complete overhaul, right? So whether it is working conditions of the doctors where they are working, or the safety and security and the resting places for these doctors, so everything require a overhaul. And Central Protection Act is the need of the hour, which actually covers the security of the hospitals and even the safety of healthcare workers across India. So the next article that we are going to discuss is about Chinese dominance in the supply of electric components for made in India products. So this is what the article is, which is given in the Indian Express newspaper. So we'll try to understand this. Now it is essentially about India's supply chain resilience, and for any country supply chain resilience is a very, very important aspect. And in fact, after the COVID-19 pandemic, the government of India planned to achieve the supply chain resilience. So that essentially means that delinking Indian supply chains from the supply chains of China, so to achieve supply chain resilience, because we have dependent on China excessively, right? So China's domination in India's imports is still continued, and that is a cause of concern, right? So this supply chain destruction could actually takes place in future if we continuously rely on China. So therefore there is a need for supply chain resilience, right? So supply chain resilience is a very important for India, and we need to de-link our supply chains from Chinese supply chains, because as of now we have been facing a lot of tensions with China. and there are border tensions and Chinese increasing influence in the Indian Ocean region. So that would not be considered good in the long term if we continues to depend on China. And one sector, for example, for active pharmaceutical ingredients, we have dependent a lot on China. And apart from active pharmaceutical ingredient, and another very important and a strategic sector is a sector called electronics manufacturing in India is another very important and a strategic sector. But unfortunately, we have dependent a lot on supply of Chinese electronic components, and we assemble those components in India and we manufacture electronic devices including the mobile phones. But the problem is that we have dependent a lot on China, and that could actually create some problems for India's supply chain resilience in the future. Now, if you go into this article, in the financial year 23-24, India imported electronic components from China worth of 12 billion US dollars, right? So this is huge, and India imported electronic component worth 12 billion dollar from China and 6 billion dollar from Hong Kong. So Hong Kong is also part of China. However, Hong Kong enjoys certain financial autonomy on its own, right? So in fact, with these two countries accounting for more than half of the total such imports to India, right? So they are accounting for half of the total such imports to India, suggesting that the country's growing footprint in electronics manufacturing may not be translating into reduced reliance on Beijing. Okay, so the share of India's electronic component imports from China and Hong Kong has been increasing a lot. And there has been, in fact, a country's growing footprint in electronics manufacturing may not yet be translated into reduced reliance on China. So we plan to reduce our reliance on China for the import of such essentials from China. So, however, we're not yet able to achieve that. So, in order to make sure that India's electronic manufacturing industry is self-sufficient, we should reduce our dependence on countries like China in the longer term. So in the last 5 years, so electronic imports specifically from China and countries like Hong Kong have actually outnumbered the imports from other major countries in the Asian region and even countries like Japan, Taiwan and South Korea, and it is a cause of concern, right? So the combined import of electronic components from all these Asian countries, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, is less than what we have been importing from China and Hong Kong, and it is a cause of concern because over reliance on any country for a longer periods of time is not a prudent policy, specifically for India and China. So because of the tensions that have been going on between India and China any day could threaten to supply these electronic components to India, and that could hit India's domestic electronic manufacturing industry. So however, if we look into the data in the year 2023-24, last financial year, the electronic component imports in India actually 34.4 billion, and in fact out of 34.4 billion we have been importing 12 billion from China itself and 6 billion from this Hong Kong itself. So there is a lion's share or the major share of the imports, the electronic component imports from China and Hong Kong itself. However, the electronic component imports in India financial year 23-24 is the 5th largest commodity to be imported into India. So first, crude oil is the largest import into India, followed by gold, petroleum products, coal. So these are the top 5 imports into India from different countries, and this data has been provided by Ministry of Commerce. So these components actually constitute, the electronic components actually constitute key building blocks for the finished electronic products. For example, we manufacture mobile phones, we manufacture laptops, and they require electronic components, right? So we import electronic components because we do not have the manufacturing base to even manufacture these electronic components. Rather, we import these components and we assemble them. We manufacture mobile phones and other electronic devices, and then we export them. And that is the problem that India has been facing with respect to the electronic components manufacturing. However, in the last 5 years, so excluding 22-23, the quantum of import of electronic components specifically from China has actually outnumbered imports from countries. We have already discussed this, right? So except 22-23, the total imports of these electronic components from China and Hong Kong actually outnumbered the countries in the Asian region, South Korea and even Japan. So understand one thing, South Korea, Taiwan, Japan are not part of the Asian. So they are not Asian countries. Rather, so all the imports from China, even more than the combined imports of all Asian countries and Japan, Taiwan, South Korea. Right. So when we talk about the ASEAN countries as a whole, so ASEAN is a 10-member grouping and Japan, South Korea. So with these countries, we have the free trade agreement. So despite having such a free trade agreement for India with these countries, we have a substantially dependent on China for the import of electronic components, and in the long term it is not sustainable. We must look to reduce our dependence on China for the electronic components. Rather, one thing is that we need to diversify the supply chains, right? So diversification of supply chains in the sense that, so these electronic components, instead of importing only from China and Hong Kong, so we could import them from Japan, Asian countries, South Korea and Taiwan. And diversification will help us in the long term. And apart from diversification, so we need to boost domestic manufacturing of these electronic components. Domestic manufacturing, right? So because it would also help us achieve the resilience. Supply chain resilience can be achieved by these two factors. One is we need to diversify the supply chains, and the other is we need to boost domestic manufacturing, and that is how supply chain resilience can be achieved in India, right? So in fact, we have been looking to achieve supply chain resilience, especially from after the COVID-19 pandemic. In order to do that, we need to reduce our dependence on China for the electronic components, right? So we need to talk about growth in the domestic electronics assembly in India. What can we do, right? So India's emergence as an electronics assembly hub. So we have been importing the electronic components, but we are assembling here. We have the assembling units, and India now emerging as a electronic assembly hub for smartphones, and other devices, computers, televisions. For all those things, India has been emerging as a electronics assembly hub. And in fact, today almost all phones which are being sold in India for India's consumers have been assembled locally in India. And in fact, India has a big manufacturing base of mobile phones manufacturing. So in fact, companies like Apple have also exporting phones from India which are assembled in India. Okay, so however, the growth has meant that India's reliance on imported electronic components would not be sustainable, because as I have already told you that India has substantially dependent on countries like China for the import of these electronic components. For example, specifically printed circuit boards, integrated circuits, and even advanced displays, camera modules. In all these things, for all these things, India has depended a lot on China and Hong Kong. Right. So therefore, the increased dependence on China is because we lack any substantial manufacturing base in India and for manufacturing these crucial components, and that is a cause of concern. However, China has actually built its manufacturing base over the last 3 to 4 decades, and that helped China to export its electronic components throughout the world, specifically for India. However, India has not developed such a strong and robust manufacturing base in the past, even though we are now trying to develop such a manufacturing base. So because of this reason, it will be very difficult to rapidly decouple from them, given that they are the biggest producers of these components and that India would need for its domestic manufacturing process. However, the government has been looking to give a push to the manufacturing of electronic components in India. So India is not just a hub of electronic assembling electronics. Rather, we could also become a hub for the electronic components manufacturing. So to solve this issue, to address this challenge, the government has actually understood to work on an incentive scheme for the electronic components. So remember that we have production linked incentive scheme. On the similar lines, the government has also been thinking of launching such a scheme which would help India emerge as a global electronic components manufacturing hub, right? So even in India's factory output for these smartphones has actually risen significantly, and that has also given a sustained push for exports from India. So however, the local value additions of the smartphones that we manufacture in India is very low. Okay, so it has not increased to the desired levels. So local value addition in the sense that whatever components that we use in these mobile phones, so that are procured from India itself rather than importing from other countries. So if we look into the data of domestic value addition in mobile phone manufacturing and mobile phone assembly, so around 15% of the domestic value addition has been added so far. However, the healthier and desirable level should be around 35 to 40%. Remember, so if we manufacture a mobile phone, the electronic components in this mobile phone should be at least 35 to 40% procured locally from India itself. However, we all knew that there have been increasing tensions at the borders and even the Indian Ocean between India and China. Both these countries have been competing and even challenging each other. And in fact, it hit the India-China relations because India has decided to move away from the Chinese supply chains by imposing an economic blockade on different sorts. For example, banning Chinese-based social media companies such as TikTok, and increasing security scrutiny of investments from Chinese mainland, essentially to prevent the predatory takeover of Indian companies by China. Predatory takeover of Indian companies by China, and even excluding Chinese products from some telecom equipment on account of national security, and even visa restrictions on Chinese technicians. So Indian government has imposed all these regulations and restrictions on Chinese investments and Chinese national who wanted to come and work in India. And in the long term, we need to significantly enhance the local value addition in the electronic devices manufacturing, and we should also have a strong presence of electronic components manufacturing base in India, and we should reduce our reliance on China for the import of electronic components by either diversifying the supply chains or boosting the domestic manufacturing of these electronic components, right? So that's all in this lecture, and if you like our work, please subscribe our YouTube channel and also hit the like button. Thank you.